Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me? What's up, Stacy? How you doing tonight? Mandy, good to see you. Everybody can hear me, correct? Excellent. All right, so might as well shoot the shit for a second before I start reading, huh? Let some people get here and all that good stuff. So how's everybody doing tonight? Everybody having an all right night? I didn't go to bed until about 7 a.m. this morning. Woke up at like 1 o'clock or something like that. That sucks. You've been sick. A lot of people have been sick lately. I'm pretty lucky. I got a pretty good immune system, and I barely ever leave my house. That's helpful. That I just really don't leave my house. You get into the whore hive by being awesome and asking. Asking helps. Should have shaved. I'm looking a bit scruffy, huh? Hello, Dustin. How you doing, man? I'm good. I'm good. Just ready to read some stories and have a good night. My Thanksgiving was pretty good. My roommates had a bunch of family over and stuff like that, and I've known my roommates for so long that they're basically family anyways. So it was just like a get together with good friends and people I've known for like 20 plus years. So it was a good time, good food. Hello, TS. Thanks for coming. All right, I will start reading, and I will start off with a story that Mandy gave me. What up, Sightless Thunderer? What would be funny, Mandy? Johnny, thanks for coming, man. All right. So this is a story all about how my life got twisted, turned upside down. No, just kidding. Um that would be funny. They're like, I gotta go. Oh, slide down the wall. Hey, yeah, thank you. Finally hit the 500 Wednesday, a mega collab with a bunch of people that chipped in, including Johnny there. Will be coming out for my channel there to celebrate 500 subs. I did a little poll on Twitter, and that's what they said I should do as a mega collab. It's about 8 stories, something like that, around 8 stories. And it's only going to be about 38, 40 minutes long or something like that. So it's not quite as long as a lot of other people's mega collabs might be, but that's all right. I don't mind. All right, so this story is called Talipo, and I don't know who it was written by, but it says it's based on a folk tale, a North American folk tale. And Mandy said this is one of her old favorite classics, and so I will give it a go and see what I can do. Hey, Haley, happy birthday! It's Haley's birthday, everybody. She's 21 years old. What's up, Jack? Yep, Haley's 21. She can finally legally drink in the States here. Just for the record, guys, all women after their 21st birthday are 21. What's up, Meow? Thanks for coming. I love you, Haley, and happy birthday. I'm very thankful for the day you were born. All right, so I'm going to get going on this story. Like I said, it's called Talipo. There was an old man who lived alone in the middle of the forest. He must have been 60 years old if he was a day, but nobody knew his real name. Most folks just called him Old Jake. He had three loyal hunting dogs that kept him company on the long, lonely nights, and their names were I Know, You Know, and Calico. He lived in an old cabin he had built himself, way back in the deep, dark woods. It wasn't very big, but it was just enough for him and his dogs. The cabin only had one room in it, and that was his bedroom, his living room, and his dining room and his kitchen, too. At one end of the room, there was a nice big open fireplace where he could cook his supper and warm his bones in the cold winter nights. Old Jake loved hunting, fishing, and the great outdoors. He had a little garden where he planted vegetables, and he would go out every day to hunt for rabbits and fish. During the warm months, there was more than enough food to go around, but in them colder months, it was hard to keep his belly full. One cold winter night, the old man's stomach was grumbling, but there was nothing to eat. In the cupboards but a few molded potatoes. He stoked a fire in the fireplace to keep the cabin warm and he went to bed. He was just about to fall asleep when he heard something in the room. "What's up, J.M. Nelson? Thanks for coming." He opened his eyes just in time to see a shadow creeping across the wall. When he sat up in bed and peered into the darkness, his eyes grew wide in terror. Sitting across the room from him was the weirdest looking creature he had ever seen. It was short and stubby, with pointed ears and bright yellow eyes that seemed to burn with some strange fire. Its body was covered in black fur, and it had big, sharp claws and a long, thick tail. For a moment, Jake just sat there, frozen in fear. He stared at the hideous creature, and it stared back at him. Then, quick as a flash, he grabbed his hunting knife and lunged at the thing. It sprang up and scurried out the hole that had clawed into the cabin. The thing was fast, but so was Jake. A split second before it escaped, he brought his knife down squarely on its big tail and cut it off. The creature let out a horrible screech and disappeared into the night. Old Jake was left standing there with a long, thick tail in one hand and a bloody knife in the other. Jake was about to throw the tail outside when his stomach started rumbling again. He was famished with hunger, so he took the tail, cleaned it, cooked it, and ate it for his supper. It tasted a bit strange, but there was a lot of it, and it was very chewy. In fact, it kind of tasted like chicken. With his stomach full, old Jake plugged up the hole in the cabin wall with some old rags and newspaper. Then he got back into bed and drifted off to sleep. He hadn't been asleep for long before he was awakened by a strange noise. It sounded like something trying to scratch its way into the cabin. The old man thought if he stayed really quiet, the thing might go away. He could hear it scratch, scratch, scratch. Then a strange voice outside hissed, "Telepo, Telepo, I want my Telepo." He thought he must be imagining things, but then he heard it again. "Telepo, Telepo, I want my Telepo." Old Jake jumped out of bed, ran to the front door, and threw it open. He called out to his dogs, "I know, you know, Calico, get over here." The dogs, they came tearing up to the cabin and ran around, barking and sniffing and snarling. They couldn't find a thing. Jake shrugged his shoulders and went back to bed again. He was just about to drift off to sleep when he heard the noise again. This time the scratching sounded like it was at the window. Whatever it was, it really, really wanted to get in. But the scratching seemed to be on two walls at one time. Then he heard the strange voice again, and this time it hissed louder. "Telepo! Telepo! Where is my Telepo?" Old Jake, who wasn't one to frighten easily, was getting a little shaky. This was getting really weird. So he eased to the window and called, "I know, you know, Comico, Calico, come on over here and see what this scratching at my house." The three dogs bounded up to the porch and they sniffed around and barked and sniffed, but they never found anything at all. Jake decided to stay up for the rest of the night to protect himself, his dogs, and his little cabin. So he pulled a chair next to the fireplace, grabbed a blanket from his bed, and settled in for the rest of the wind-chilled wintry night. Sleep soon overtook him, and once again he dozed off. It was almost dawn when Jake woke up with a start. The sound of scratching seemed to reverberate from every area of the cabin. Jake searched frantically for his axe, his rifle, or something to defend himself with, but he was so frightened he couldn't find anything. The scratching grew louder and louder and louder. Tellypaw, Tellypaw, give me back my Tellypaw. Jake yelled back, You leave me alone, I ain't got your Tellypaw. Then he called his dog, but this time the dogs didn't come. He waited and waited, but still not one dog came a running. Jake had never been so scared in his life. He ran to his bed and jumped in. The scratching and the voice grew louder and louder and louder. Tellypaw, Tellypaw, give me back my Tellypaw. Jake yelled back as loud as he could. I ain't got no Tellypaw. So why don't you leave me alone and go on about your business? I ain't never heard nobody or nothing. Just leave me alone. The scratching seemed to be inside the house now, and the voice was so loud it was deafening. Tellypaw, Tellypaw, you took my Tellypaw. I said that weird. Now I'm back to get it. Give it to me now. Jake pulled the cover up in his head and stayed as quiet as he could, but the scratching was now in his room. Tellypaw, Tellypaw, you better give me back my Tellypaw. Jake then felt the thing scratching up the bottom of the bed onto the cover. Jake eased the cover down to see what was steadily approaching. Then he saw it. A short, stubby creature with pointed ears, fat feet, and long claws, bloodshot red eyes that glowed in the dark. Eyes that seemed to burn straight through Jake. Before he could pull the cover over his head, the thing pounced on his chest, looked straight down at him, and said, You got my Tellypaw. You better give it back to me now. Jake yelled, I ate it. I ate your Tellypaw. It's gone. And that thing started to scratch and claw and tear away at poor old Jake, trying to get that Tellypaw back. Jake tried to fight back, but that thing was too strong. Those claws were too sharp. Jake's screams echoed throughout the dark mountains, then stopped, leaving a chilling silence. After a month or two without hearing from old Jake, the townspeople got word and came looking for him. They hiked up the mountain and through the forest, but when they reached his cabin, they found it had been torn to shreds. There was no sign of Jake or the dogs. They searched the woods and called out to them, Jake, I know, you know, Calico. There's no answer. Old Jake and his dogs were never seen again. The townspeople say that if you're all alone out there at night and you listen carefully, you can hear a strange voice calling on the wind. Tellypaw, Tellypaw, now I've got my Tellypaw. Oh, there's the end of that one. What's up, April? So what's up, everybody? What was it to your liking, Mandy? Was that okay? The Eminem of freestyle, fucking narrator got him. I have to write a rap now. You know that, right? I got to. Now I got to. Everybody like and share and all that good stuff. Oh, and let me mention, if you look in the description, there is a sale, like a promo code sale thing going on for Cyber Monday in the merch store, where you get 15% off and free shipping right now. So if you ever wanted to buy a shirt or something like that, you can get free shipping and 15% off. So Check that out. The code is like cyber sale, all capitals, one word. It's in the description. At least it should. It better be. I put it there. Better be in there. Hey, what up, Rainer? Thanks for coming. I do have two more stories that are ready to go. One of them Haley gave me to read, and another one is from a subscriber actually. That I've actually had it for a couple of weeks, and I forgot to read it last time. What's up, Kid Bina? So I'll definitely have to give that one a read this week since I remembered it. So yeah, let's like, share, all that good stuff. Get the word out. Try to get some more people in here to come hang out with us. And everybody check out each other's channel if you're new, if you're not subbed to somebody that's in here and everything else, check them out. I mean, there's a lot of people in here that either have YouTube channels or narrators themselves or they're writers. Yes, Haley, you can get yourself something today if you want to. It's your birthday anyways. There's no rules on your birthday. Come on. All right, so I am going to read. I don't have the person's name who sent me this story, but too bad. I don't know if they wanted me to say their name anyways, so I'm not going to. It's just called My House. Before we moved into my house, so said, it was on the market for 30 years before your family moved in and then waiting for the perfect tenants. I thought, perfect tenants? Oh, odd, my cousin and her family wanted to move into my house. My cousin at the time worked with the government and her husband was a police officer. Oh well, we got our house. My mom, dad, grandma, little brother, my son, and myself moved into my house. We moved in 2002. My first and only son was 2 years old then. Being a single mom wasn't all that bad, ha ha ha. I had my family to help me out. All said and done, back to my house. One night, I left my son in my room in front of a karaoke machine listening to his audio storybooks, and he was holding his book while my dad, mom, and myself were watching a movie. Out of speed of light, my son came running into the room, into the living room. He had this look on his face. He looked at me and pointed towards my room. I thought, oh, his story must be over. And I got up, and his story was still going. I looked at my son. He was looking at the corner of the wall and the ceiling, laughing so hard. I looked at the corner of the wall and the ceiling. I didn't see anything. I usually see things people can't see. I turned off the karaoke machine, grabbed extra Pampers and a baby bottle, grabbed my son and took him to the living room. He was just laughing so hard, tried to stop. He stood up, he fell on his butt, and we all started laughing. I finally saw what he was laughing at. It was a ghost. The ghost was wearing a white long dress, white hair as snow. Her face was white as well. She was making faces and having fun with my son. I knew it right away. My house is haunted. My dad was 24-hour coffee. My dad was a 24-hour coffee drinker and a smoker. Smoking wasn't allowed in the house for two reasons. One, my son, and two, my grandma. She was bedbound, had an oxygen mask attached to an oxygen machine. She was a baby herself. She loved reading, coloring books, time with my son and myself, of course. One night, Grandma got out of bed. She couldn't walk. She scared the heebie-jeebies out of me. I yelled, "Grandma, what are you doing out of bed?" Grandma, on the floor, had a huge smile on her face and said, "The man helped me get out of bed." Oh, wait. "The man helped me get out of bed." I was in a panic. I yelled for my dad. Dad came in and asked, Mom, what are you doing? Grandma laughed. The man helped me out of the bed. My dad yelled for my little brother. My little brother ran to the corridor. Dad asked, Did you help Grandma get out of bed? You're the only man on this side of the house. My little brother said, No. By that time, Grams was on her wheelchair. Dad took her to the living room. I was behind Dad, walking her hospital table. I started to cry. I noticed that everyone was eating dinner as a family. Dad went to get Dad went to get a coffee refill in the kitchen. Dad noticed that the coffee maker was off. Dad had this thing. Dad had this thing you'll when he's mad. No one was allowed to touch his coffee maker. He held back, yet he asked, Who turned off my coffee maker? We said at once, Not I. Grandma and my son were laughing. 2005, the time was 4 o'clock a.m. Dad was getting ready to go to work. I woke up and heard a loud thump in the corridor and in the bathroom. It was Dad. He was having a heart attack. My little brother and myself were giving my dad CPR, and I was yelling, crying, and I was in a panic. Dad, don't you dare go. Not now. We want and need you here. Daddy, come back. Junior, help me. Help me bring Daddy back. Junior started to cry. He knew, but he tried. Junior stopped. The EMT and the police showed up at my house, and Dad was gone. I saw his soul leaving from the opening of his mouth. Dad never left the house. Things were different. I could hear the door that leads to the garage open and close, cabinet doors opening and closing by themselves. The smell of coffee and cigarettes filled the kitchen. I started to cry. Daddy, I love you so much. I forgive you for everything. Thank you so much for finding my happy state, California. I wanted to move back, you said. No more moving. Mom has too much shit to be packed, unpacked, and hauling. I laughed. You made our home, state of South Texas, a happy place for everyone. I miss you, Daddy. I didn't smell the coffee nor cigarettes. Dad left. 2006, 6 months after Dad left, Dad came back and took Grandma with him. They never left the house. Things move by themselves. When they want to, they let us see them. Grandma's coloring book pages flapping back and forth as if looking for a picture to color, the karaoke machine turning on its own, Grandma's gospel cassette playing. One night, my little brother Junior decided to put my video camera on its shelf facing him. Then he went to sleep. The next night, he put the video camera on the breakfast bar. I don't remember which way the camera was facing. He also put the video camera in what is now my mom's room, where Grandma used to sleep. Finally, after using up the tape, Junior got my mom and myself into the living room and played the tape. On the tape in Junior's room, now my room, we saw 5 ghosts flying and or coming out of the closet, all of them white from head to toe and wearing long dresses, full-bodied apparitions flying all over the place, as if whispering in Junior's ear. Curious, wanting to know, the ghosts flew in and out of the video camera, wanting to getting real close to up to the lens, while the others were flying all over the room, but 3 never moved away from my little brother Junior. On the part of the kitchen, the door that leads to the garage, you could hear the door open and close, cabinet doors opening and slamming closed, the coffee maker brewing coffee. At the time, the cabinet door slammed closed. We all jumped with fright. Me, I said with a little laugh, Daddy, you just had to wait for your perfect timing. I bowed and I shook my head. Grandma's room, which is now my mom's room, you could hear Grandma laughing, throwing things, rattling the hospital bed rails, knocking on walls, ringing up a bell. Dad had given Grandma a bell with a long handle to ring instead of knocking on the walls. After all the noise, Grandma said, Come here. I want to get out. I want to get out. I'm over here. Hey, don't you hear me calling you? Speaking in English and Spanish. We call it Tex-Mex. My son's room is the master bedroom. Some nights I hear him screaming. I ran to the room and I asked, Are you okay? He yells again. He said, Mom, I felt someone touching me. I said to him, Stop. He didn't. To calm things down and to feel more at ease, I sat next to him, holding him. It could have been a wellow. It could have. It could have been Wello. Oh, it could have been Wello or Grandpa. He's letting you know that he'll always be with you. You'll have to make a special place in your heart just for him. I gave him a big hug, and then he said, "I miss Wello." I gave my son a kiss on his forehead, and so do I. Every now and then, you could see the full bodied apparitions floating around inside the house and outside of my house. Chapter 2. That's what Grandma did, Jack. The attic door isn't a normal attic door. To get inside the attic, you need a very tall ladder, and to open the door, you got to push the sheet and or sheer rock aside. It was more or less 4 or 5 p.m. I was extremely bored, so I decided to look around the house. What was there to tidy up? Nothing. The dishes were already washed. I thought laundry. Yes, I'll do laundry. As I was putting the clothes in the washing machine, I heard a funny sound. I didn't bother. Again, the funny sound, as if it got mad, sounded louder. I looked everywhere in the garage, top to bottom, but nothing was out of place. I went back to the laundry room and started the machine. This time I listened closely. The noise started again. I looked up. It was the attic door, flapping up and down really fast. I said, "I don't know who you are and what you're doing in our attic. You scared me once. You're not going to scare me again." The attic door fixed itself properly, and I left. I was laying down on my bed. Either I was watching TV, listening to my music, reading, or just writing anything that comes to mind, when I heard a bang and running really fast coming from inside the ceiling. I thought of the roof. Some kind of animal dropped food and ran away. I went outside, climbed a ladder to see the top of the roof. Nothing. I amazed at how much things looked beautiful and being scared not to fall from the roof. I'm scared of heights. I slowly started to climb down the ladder when it started to shake. I yelled, "Junior, stop shaking the ladder. I'm scared and I want to be on the ground." I was struck. I was stuck in the middle of the ladder. I didn't want to move. My little brother has a bad habit of picking on me since we were kids. I'm the only woman out of my 2 brothers. After I yelled at my little brother, I realized I'm the only one at home. Well, there's your first mistake. You don't go on ladders when you're alone. My oldest brother was at his house and my little brother at his. My mom, well, she does whatever. I started to cry. Every move I made, the ladder moved. I learned my lesson not to go climbing where I'm not supposed to. Ha ha ha. I heard my daddy's voice. He called me by my name. I'll rename myself Anakin. Anakin, we have the higher ground. Anakin, get off the ladder. You're going to fall and break something. I replied with, "I'm trying, but the ladder keeps shaking. I'm not shaking the ladder either." My daddy replied, "I'll hold the ladder. You hurry down. I don't want to see you on the roof." All I could say was, "Okay, Daddy." I got down with no problems. I thanked my daddy. Wait a minute. My daddy has been in heaven for a while already. We just had this little conversation and helped me get down. I was crying even more. When I finally stopped, my eyes were red, burning, and very swollen. I heard the same noise, loud thumps, and running very fast. I'm not going outside. I don't care anymore. I realized the noise was coming from the attic. I'm not going to look. I'm not going to be able to get down this time. No one is home. 2018 already, and we still live in the same house. Strange things still happen, and all I gotta say is, Daddy, Grandma, and the rest of the ghosts. You can make all the noise you want, move things around, show yourself whenever you want. You're on your own. Everyone's everyone scared me time and time again. This time no more. I love you, Daddy and Grandma. Take care of each other and never leave the house. Interesting story. Yeah, that name Anakin. I'm gonna rename myself Anakin. Well, that story. I don't think the person was necessarily an author, so it was kind of awkward to read at some times. But I got what they were saying. Clay Aiken, that dude can sing. Hello, Christina. Thanks for coming. And also, if anyone has any other stories, yeah, right, Haley? Who in the right mind would climb a ladder when they have health problems, when they're all alone in a house? So many things could happen. They could fall, they could overwork themselves and start feeling sick. They could forget to drink their liquids and start feeling sick. There's just so many things that could happen. It's very dangerous. They could leave Crow alone because they fell off a ladder and broke their neck, and then Crow would be sad and lonely for the rest of his life. Many things can happen. Johnny would do that. Ugh, Johnny, come on, Johnny. You gotta drink your proper liquids. Come on, be like Crow. This is water, not Mountain Dew. It's important. Hey, what's up, Mr. Reality? Mr. Reality is someone else that's on the Mega Collab coming out Wednesday. So is Devil Jack. Devil Jack's on the Mega Collab as well. All right. So I'll get to the story that Haley gave me. Also, if anyone has any stories that you want me to read, like you got a favorite creepy pasta or no sleep or whatever, I don't care what kind of story, as long as it's a spooky story, of course. Well, I can't afford fancy things like whiskey, Dustin. That stuff costs money, and I have none. Well, very little of it. Like, you know, I got, this kind of money. That's a penny. But yep, I'll get to reading now. If anyone has any stories though that you would like me to read, send me the link to it either on Twitter or on my Discord channel if you got me on Discord. So just send me the link to it, and as long as it is a creepy story, a horror story, a personal experience, whatever, I'll read it. That's what I'm here for. That's the whole reason I started Murder Monday, is because I want to be able to specifically read your guys' favorite stories. You know, well, you just got kicked out of here. What the man? Nobody better be getting kicked out of here. Ain't nobody. Well, I know you. Oh, you mean like favorite stories? Send me some stories if you want me to read, Jack. I'm down with that, man. I mean, I know I've already read most of the stories you've written, but if you want me to read some other stories, I would be happy to do that. But this one, I am going to start reading. This one, Haley found for me. It is called In the Darkness of the Fields. It's by Ho Ju. Yeah, Ho Ju. Ho underscore Ju. Ju. Ju is a Ju. I apologize for the length of this account. I have tried to preserve the sense of my memory as well as the factual details as sparingly as possible without destroying their effect. And I had to burp, so excuse me. Rather than segment this story into separate posts, I had marked into 3 parts with page breaks for your ease in reading it. If you want to read one part and revisit the rest later, In editing, I've gone through and omitted from this story all the names of localities for the sake of not embarrassing small communities by reassociating them with painful events from their past. To give you some sense of the geography where this occurred, the events described below took place in a rural community between Lima, Ohio and Fort Wayne, Indiana. Ooh, that's kind of close to me, actually. Growing up, as I did in a cozy college town in central Ohio, my childhood visits to my grandmother's home in the country were always a mixed blessing for me. She lived in a small one-story home along a country road nestled amongst the farms of western Ohio. While I loved visiting my grandmother, the openness of the country and its seemingly endless fields had a way of making me feel isolated, especially in the autumn months. During the summer, the tall, fern green stalks of corn and the steamy soil gave the area an inviting vibrancy that helped fill this emptiness. The fall was much bleaker. Once the crops were harvested and the leaves had fallen off the trees, the region took on an air of rot, and the remnants of the harvested stalks would dry and fade to the point that they were finally resembled bleached bones. Did little to dispel this. One October, I headed up with my mom and dad for a visit. Of course, as someone who's always had an overactive imagination, the fact that the trip to her house was intermittently dotted abandoned cemeteries did nothing to help my uneasiness. Apparently, family plots, they would consist of a handful of sandstone grave markers eroding like wet sugar cubes into tangled grass. There was also the occasional ruined church amongst the stones. Unfortunately for me, besides these sightings and the unending farmland, there wasn't much to break up the drive. Reading in the car has always made me sick. Naturally, I was relieved when I felt the tires shift onto the rumbling gravel that covered my grandma's driveway. After stretching my legs from the trip, I walked over to give my grandmother, a short, blue-haired woman of about 70 at the time, a hug. We followed her into the house for dinner. My grandmother was an amazing cook, and I always made sure my mom got her recipes. That World War II generation who really knew how to throw a stick of butter into mashed potatoes in a way that would blow your mind. There wasn't much to do at her house after dinner, so I volunteered to burn her trash. Now, solidly in my tweens, I could be trusted with such responsibilities and took full advantage. Since, like most boys that age, I fancied myself a bit of a pyro expert. As I dragged the bag of garbage out of the house, I noticed that it was already getting dark and gray flannel clouds had silently filled the sky. Having visited the area enough to know that rain was probably coming soon, I hurriedly dragged the bag into the metal drum my grandma used for burning trash and lawn waste. It was at the back corner of the lot, where the edges of her grass, faded and gloomy with the fall, met the ragged dirt of the fields. I threw the bag in and lit it in a few places. I watched it for a while before the rain began to come down sprinkling. I decided that the rain would be enough to keep the fire from spreading out of control. I went inside to the sound of rumbling thunder in the distance. Knowing that it was getting late, I began to get anxious with the thought of going to bed. I never slept well at my grandma's. As I said, I had an active imagination, and even in my secure suburban bedroom on the second floor of our home, I frequently had nightmares about what could be outside of my home while I was in bed. My grandmother's entire home was single story. What was worse was I usually slept in the breezeway, which I later discerned wasn't strictly a breezeway, but was more of a living room space between the garage and the house. It was separated from the house where my parents and grandmother stepped by a short flight of stairs and a door. There were three other doors leading to the garage and front and back lawns. The room also had windows on every side except where it bordered the garage. Other than the couch I slept on and a sink, there was nothing else in the room. I always felt very alone and isolated sleeping in there. I laid in bed for a couple of hours and listened to it rain outside. After a while, I heard a train rumble by on the track across the street from the front lawn. I got off the couch and walked over to the window to watch it go by. It always made me uncomfortable how flimsy those single pane windows are, like there was nothing separating you from the night. After the last car disappeared, I stood there looking out the window for a bit. At this point, it dawned on me that the rain had stopped. I was somewhat upset with myself since I had missed my best chance of having that soothing sound lull me to sleep. However, I could still hear the rumbles and flashes of a storm and hoped that it was another one moving in, and not just the last one growing more distant. As my eyes continued to adjust, I noticed a flicker on the grass on the right side of my vision. Clearly, the fire hadn't gone out in the back of the lawn, and I went to the rear breezeway window to check on it. Looking through the back window, it quickly became apparent that there had been more unburnt refuse in the drum than I had thought. The glow of the fire was casting spots of faint orange light across along the lawn and fields. The light was reaching far into the night in that flat, dark country, and I noted with some dismay that the storm appeared to be moving south. As I watched the faint flashes of light exploding on the horizon, my eyes shifted back to the fields behind my grandmother's house. There was something moving on the edge of the light. My eyes were fairly well adjusted to the night at this point, and I gradually made it out. It was the form of a woman dancing in the field. Her movements weren't frantic, they were closer to the way a ballerina moves, slowly dipping the torso, lifting the leg gracefully, bowing the arms over her head, and so on. I stood there petrified in silence. Her mere presence and peculiar movements would have been enough to frighten me. However, a distant flash of lightning consumed the entire field in a moment of pale white light, revealing that she was also completely naked. My hands gripped the windowsill. She slowly danced along the edges of the fire's orange light, never stepping more than a foot or an arm directly into it. It made me even more uncomfortable when I noticed that she was facing the house and appeared to be closer than she was when I first saw her. There had been only one lightning flash to illuminate the entire field, so it was difficult to tell at first. But as she drew near to the window from which I was standing, I began to realize that her skin was incredibly wrinkled, despite the grace and effortlessness of her movements. Her skin appeared to be ancient as it sagged off her limbs. Gradually, quite gradually she quit edging around the borders of the light and reversed her dance movements back into the darkness. I pulled myself away from the window and buried my face on the couch. I spent the rest of the night trying to convince myself that it was a trick of shadows. All right, that was the first part. I'm going to take a break since this is apparently quite a long story. So it sounds like to me this dude's grandmother is dancing naked in the fields. I mean, that's just what it sounds like to me. I mean, what do you guys think? What's up, Shadow Gaming? Thanks for subbing, man. Appreciate it. I guess I don't know if you're a man or woman. Hey, what up, Drac? Thanks for coming. Wimp, what's up, Wimp? Thanks for coming, dude. Stacy, you're not dumb. Don't say you're dumb. How you doing tonight, Drac? Does Bad Vibes really have a ghost? Where is Bad Vibes? Does he really have a ghost in his hallway? I haven't noticed anything weird here for a while. There you are, Bad Vibes. You got a ghost? Like for real though? Like for real though, you got a ghost? Where is Forewarnings? Is she skipping? Is Forewarning skipping to last? How very dare she? Well, good, Dustin. I'm glad I can entertain you, man. Tess S. Shout out, Tess S. What up, Tess S? All right, I'm gonna get on to the next part. You might die tonight. I see my personal experiences with ghosts, bad vibes, is that they won't kill you. That's my personal experience. I don't know. Your ghost might be angrier than the ones I'm used to. I don't know. She'd rather watch the Golden Girls, huh? I believe that. I believe that, Jack. Golden Girls was a classic show. I can't fault her for that. All right, on to part two of this here story. I didn't get a wink of sleep that night. What? I didn't get a wink of sleep that night. I and crashed. I don't think that I is supposed to be there. I'm a little suspicious of that I. And crashed around 6 or 7 a.m. when the sun came up. Even though I hadn't called for them the night before, my family knew how hard it was for me to go to sleep at my grandmother's and let me sleep in for a while. I was eventually woken up by my father, who informed me that my grandmother's ladder was broken and we would need to go borrow one from my Uncle Harley, who was actually my great uncle, though I never referred to him as such. I smiled and rolled off the couch. I always enjoyed seeing my Uncle Harley and was quick to get ready to go despite my lack of sleep. Oh, TS. Is that who you were talking about, Shadow Gaming? Were you talking about TS or TSS? I recall being quiet on the ride over to Harley's farm. Looking out into the fields, I realized even if footprints had been left by the woman. Oh, excuse me. Damn. I realized even if footprints had been left by the woman in the wet dirt, they would be nearly impossible to find in such a large field with so much debris left over from the harvest. Undecided as to whether that made me feel better or worse, I continued to watch the ruins of the corn stalks fly by along the roadside until the buildings of my uncle's farm began to come into view. My uncle Harley was a pig farmer, and to this day it makes me smile when people invoke the profession derisively. My uncle was a successful businessman and farmer, owning a large factory style farm, though he didn't do any of the processing on site. He did own several large feed silos next to the long metal barns which held the pens. My uncle was a self made man and a veteran of both World War II and the Korean War, and reminded me a bit of Clint Eastwood. The man was tall and powerful even in his advanced age, and despite his stoic demeanor, he had surprisingly sharp sense of humor. I could see him waving to us as we turned onto his driveway. Oh, don't get Jack flogging. He was flogging himself the other night. As I got out of the car, I noticed how strong the stench of pigs was. It was a smell I was used to, and the surrounding area fairly permeated of it, along with other scents that colored the air in farm country. I actually grew to be somewhat fond of the smell from a distance, as weird as that sounds, but it was overpowering up close. I flashed my uncle a smile, but covered my nose with my shirt as soon as he and my dad turned away from me towards the work shed where my uncle kept his ladders. I went over to a tire swing hanging from a tree on the opposite side of his house, and more importantly, upwind of the barns. When my uncle came back around the house with my dad carrying the ladder under one arm, I was standing on the swing, with one foot in the tire and my hands grasping the rope connected to the tree. You keep swinging around like that, you're just going to stir up the smell, he yelled at me as I hopped off the swing. I was mildly embarrassed that he had keyed in on my distaste for the smell, but felt better when he conceded that the rain had made it worse than usual. We stayed a bit after picking up the ladder, but my dad wanted to get back to my grandma's before dark. We were only going to be there for the weekend, and he wanted to make sure we finished the work. When we got back, my dad had me hold the ladder as he scooped brown muck out of the gutter. I was so lost in thought looking out into the fields that I nearly dropped the ladder after a piece of muck falling shocked me back to reality. I was only able to offer a feeble apology afterwards, as my mind was still on the previous night and the faded orange on the horizon that indicated that night was coming. Not wanting to give my parents a reason to doubt my maturity or sanity, I didn't tell them about the night before. The reward for my bravery was another night in the breezeway. Unlike the night before, this one was completely cloudless, with a bright moon casting pale rays through the windows. I didn't figure I was in for much sleep and just laid on my back on the couch, staring at the ceiling. I could hardly believe it when I heard the grandfather clock's Westminster chimes from across the house, followed by the bells denoting the hour. How clearly those low tones made their way through the air made me realize how silent the night had been, and let me know it was already 2 in the morning. The drowsy formation of, of this thought was shattered by another sound, a faint sound, rustling from outside. The noise sent a chill down my spine, and I immediately snapped up to see the window over the sink was cracked open. My mom or grandma must have opened it for the ventilation during the day. Doing my best not to look out the window and to stay beneath the window line above which someone could see me, I rolled off the couch and hugged closely to the sink. As my fingers crept up the wall, over the sill, and onto the window, I heard another rustle, louder, from the backyard. Out of my peripheral vision, I saw movement and felt a tear of frustration and fear trace down my cheek. I pulled the window shut, and as I did so, looked out the window to my left into the backyard. The woman was there, standing not 15 feet from the house and staring at me through the window. I was frozen, partly out of fear and partly out of a hope that she didn't see me. After all, I was closing a window on nearly the opposite end of the room in the dead of the night. Her body was facing away from me, and the skin on her back was hanging like melted wax. Her head was turning, looking over to her left shoulder to face the house, to face me. Her arms were spread out at away from her body, and her palms were aimed in my direction. With the same grace that she had displayed the night before, she pivoted her body on one foot, turning to face the rear window. She slowly moved towards the house. Her movements illuminated the moonlight. I think it should be her movements illuminated by moonlight. It was then that I realized yet another horrible thing about this woman. Her skin wasn't just baggy, it was jointed. She looked like a rag doll that had just been sewed together. It seemed like it had been held together by shedding in sections. The moon cast shadows over eye sockets which didn't quite seem to fit her face. As she crept closer, I noticed her lips looked thin and cracked, and her breasts were dry and shriveled. Slowly, she placed her hands on the frame of the window, and I made out a glint of two eyes in the shadows of those ill shaped sockets. They were peering right at me with an intensity that cut right through the space between us. The shock of her looking into the house was enough to turn the squeaks caught in my throat into screams. I flopped onto the floor and scrambled backwards against the front door. I could hear my parents stirring in the house as their footsteps approached. The woman tilted her head back, her face appeared to stretch into a howl, but it didn't seem like she could move her lips very far apart. I couldn't hear if she made a sound. She pirouetted and disappeared back into the night. I threw up into my lap as my parents came into the room. Well, that's the end of part two. All right, so Grandma's getting weird. Or is this just one of them pigs that are getting out? All right, Stacy, you have a good night. Thanks for hanging out. Ah, bad vibes ghost, huh? I'm not so convinced. I mean, it looked like that ghost taking a selfie right there. All right, again, if anyone wants to send me a story to read after this one's done, because we only got one more part on this one, then go ahead and send me a link on Twitter or my Discord or my email, which I will put right here. Right there's my email. So if you want to email me a story or anything like that, just send me a link to it, please. Oh, that's pretty cool, Dustin. You should totally write up an account that you've had and email it to me, dude. I'll read it during one of the live streams, man, for sure. That goes for anyone. If you have any personal experiences, write them up for me, and I'll email them to me, and I'll read them during the live streams. That'd be awesome. If you do that, though, make sure you put in the email whether or not you want me to say who you are. You know, so like, if you want to stay anonymous or whatever, then that's cool. I understand. Just let me know if you want that. How lick ass? How lick ass? How lick ass my man? Is that a compliment or an insult? Because I'm confused. Apparently, my Manamount story is lick ass. I mean, I guess could be a good or a bad thing depending on the condition of the ass I'm licking, I suppose, right? All right, part three. The next morning, my parents didn't prod me to talk about what I had seen. I explained it to them in jabbering fashion the night before as they helped me clean up. Eventually, I fell asleep with my mom sitting up next to me. I had had a handful of night terrors when I was younger, and my parents chalked up my experience to that category. I said nothing to dispute this, even though I didn't believe it. I hoped that I really had had a night terror, and that maybe that would explain what I had seen. My dad offered to let me stay in my grandmother's as he returned the ladder he had borrowed from my uncle. Because I didn't want my family to worry about my state, I insisted on accompanying him. Besides, I figured getting out would help me calm down. However, as we drove, I imagined her behind every tree we passed, lurking in every drainage ditch. For the most part, I just laid back with my seat reclined, staring into nothing until we got to the farm. By the time we got there, I was feeling a bit better. Still, I decided to stay in the car as my dad went with my uncle to return the ladder to its shed. I didn't need the smell of those pigs upsetting my stomach further. First of all, dude, come on now. You can smell that in a car. It don't matter. As I was trying to put my thoughts elsewhere, I glanced into the rearview mirror and saw another vehicle coming down the driveway. It was a pickup. It pulled past me towards the barn as my uncle and dad came around the house. The truck stopped and the driver got out. I was relieved that my uncle didn't appear concerned, but he did have a stern look on his face. He made a couple of steps towards the pickup and pointed the driver to the barn. The barn, the barn. The driver then walked over to the barn, slid the door to the side, and picked up a leash to a pig that had been tied to one of the pens. As he led the pig towards the pickup, my uncle and father kept walking towards the car. I opened the door to say hi. That's Teddy, my uncle said. He has a small farm, maybe a dozen pigs. Usually don't sell single hogs and sows. Started doing it a while ago to help him get started, and now it seems he's coming by once every few weeks. What's the problem? My dad asked. My uncle laughed. With the pigs or with everything else? Not sure. In any case, he eats some, he tries to breed others. I suppose. I don't talk with him much. Just sell him a pig every now and then. He says he butchers his own meat. My dad looked over in the man's direction. He's trying to be self sufficient? I guess. I try not to talk to him too much. God damn it, Ted. I looked away from my uncle and dad to see the man opening the hog's throat with a long knife. He had his arm around its side and its legs kicked around as if it was being electrocuted. I couldn't believe how much blood spilled out of its neck and onto the ground. Didn't I tell you not to do that here? The man smiled weirdly at my uncle and then slung the pig's limp body into the bed of the truck. It was amazing how effortlessly he did it. The hog must have weighed a few hundred pounds. He pulled the tarp over the body before he closed the tailgate. The man turned and got into the driver's side of the car. Blood was dripping onto the ground from under the tailgate. My uncle sighed and looked at the ground, visibly pissed. He doesn't have a proper trailer to move them around, so sometimes he does that here to make it easier. Smiling up at me, he added, or sometimes he hog ties them. I laughed, even though it wasn't a great joke, or even a joke at all, really, since I'm sure that's exactly what he did. The way my uncle said it put a smile on my face. He pinched the bridge of his nose as the pickup drove by and waved his other hand without looking at the man. The man barely looked at us, but I caught a glimpse of his eyes that made me shiver. We left for home fairly soon after getting back to my grandmother's, which was fine with me. I loved her, but I was ready to get out of there. I slept the whole ride home and tried to put the whole experience out of my mind the best I could. For years after that, I visited my grandmother's without incident. On one particular visit, I picked up the local paper while I was in town. On the front page was the face of the man I had seen at the farm that day, Teddy. The memory of that story and the realization that came with it chills me even now as I recollect it. The man, who was apparently named Teddy Warden, had been in a car accident in his pickup. He was speeding through a stop sign on a country road in the early morning when a semi crushed on the passenger side of his truck. The pickup was sent spinning across the intersection and flipped into a drainage ditch. By the time the driver of the semi got out to check on the other vehicle, Warden had already crawled out of the cab and was tearing across the field. Perplexed, the driver continued towards the flipped pickup, then fled back to his semi to call for help. The tarp was draped out of the bed of the pickup, fully uncovering its spilled contents. Corpses and the parts of corpses were scattered into the mud. Later that day, the sheriff's office, with backup from a larger nearby city's police department, showed up at the man's house. They reported an overpowering stench from the outside of the building. Opening the garage, they found the butchered and rotting skeletons of hogs. One hog was hanging upside down, field dressed like a deer. They noted that it appeared as if he was slaughtering them and feeding them to other pigs, as putrefying hog meat was found in the feed troughs. It was a mat it was a matter they were forced to investigate in some detail after the horror they discovered inside. The officers were met it, by an intensified smell inside the house. The building was completely unlit and I can only imagine how horrible it was for them to comb that house. The source of the smell wasn't the pigs, or at least it wasn't just the pigs. Hanging from the walls were the remnants of human bodies in various stages of decomposition. They weren't just hung on the walls like trophies either. The paper likely spared many of the details, but noted that there were several overturned skulls that appeared to be used as bowls. When the officers entered Warden's room, they found him rocking in his bed, hands at his side. He had skulls on the bedpost. The floor was apparently littered with the remnants of corpses, and even though he made no reported attempt to resist arrest, gotta take a drink. Excuse me. See you, Kit Bina. It was apparently difficult to get Warden out through the darkness and clutter. Warden only howled as they removed him from the house. The writer noted that his home's distance from the road and Warren's known habit of transporting butchered animals in his truck had kept the signs of his activities hidden. As of the date of that paper's printing, those involved had discerned that the body parts had come from at least 38 separate individuals, though they were still in the process of sorting and identifying the remains. Initially, this confused investigators. Such a high number of disappearances would have been noticed in such a small town. However, the answers to their questions quickly became apparent through examination of the corpses and interviews with Warden. Many of the bodies were ancient, nearly fully decomposed. The investigators surmised that they had been stolen from graves, and conclusive that was later confirmed by Warden. While a few were identified as thefts from recent burials, the majorities of the bodies had been stolen from the abandoned cemeteries that sit in the country roads, the disturbed earth obscured by the long grass. They would likely never discover the identities of many of these older corpses. Though the thought of Warden quietly absconding in the dead of night to an abandoned graveyard and stealing the long decomposing bodies interred therein is certainly chilling to me, the most unsettling part of the story involves how they found Warden in his house before they arrested him. When the officers discovered Warden in his bed, he was lying next to a woman's suit, carefully sewn together from the skin of the fresher corpses he had exhumed. Through interviews, the police had discovered that Warden would wear the suit and prowl the fields at night, using the seclusion afforded by the darkness and remoteness to live out his fantasies. The realization washed over me. All those years ago, I had seen him. He and I, alone in the darkness, separated by a flimsy window and a little bit of space. This is just like a rewriting of Ed Gein. Did anyone else notice that? Like that last part was literally just rewritten Ed Gein. But still, I mean, that would be creepy as fuck, no doubt about it. Ooh, some stories. Oh, man, turn up this heat. Killing me. All right, Jack gave me some stories here. Yeah, I seen that. Thank you. I'm gonna take a break though. It's like had some freaking coughing fit. Ooh, it's another one by D.A. Schneider. Nice. Nice. Nice, Brad. Let me know when it's done, man. I actually still need to record something for this Friday, actually. Oh, they're all from D.A. Schneider. Nice. The horror on the housetops. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Oh, is this about? Oh no, I see. I was wondering if it was about that one account of the footsteps that went for miles and miles and like went up the side of houses and over the roofs and everything else. These cloven hoofs. It's get oh, all right. Sorry, Haley. Let me. Yeah, right. Get out of here. Don't get out of here, Haley. Don't leave me. Yeah, that story with the yeah. I like hearing about all kinds of stuff like that. How many of you heard about that missing 411 stuff? Actually, wouldn't mind reading some of that stuff sometime, honestly. Oh, yes, and like and share. Yep, that's who it is, David Pilates. Like and share and all that good stuff, please. See if we can get some new people in here. Seen a couple of new people in here today. But the more the merrier. Haley. All right, I guess I'll start reading this. Horror on the housetops. The snow was coming hard, riding the force gale winds and pummeling the big man's face as he dropped the sleigh through the clouds. It was one of the worst storms Kringle could remember seeing in all of his many Christmas Eves, but he pushed on, braved the harsh conditions to deliver the toys to all the nice children around the world. Is that what you think, Mandy? I think it's something else. Chris pulled on the reins and guided the reindeer to the cluster of houses below. Another cookie cutter neighborhood with houses so close together he needed nothing more than to park on one housetop and hop to the others on each side of the street. A welcomed convenience, to be sure. The sleigh came to a stop and Chris climbed down, hefting his large sack full of toys over one shoulder. Down the first chimney he went, where he landed gently on the hearth. He ducked down and slid out into the family room, which held a tree decorated in red and silver. He dropped the sack on the floor, stood in front of the fireplace with a twinkle of his nose. A fire blazed to life. For a moment he let it warm him, melting the ice in his beard and mustache. Finally he turned and placed the toys around the tree, killed the fire, and zipped back up the chimney. The frigid wind cut through his heavy coat and all layers beneath. It was only because he had his head down against the storm that he noticed the blood first and the source of it later. The reindeer was lying in the snow. His head had been removed and his body was a lifeless lump. The head was missing. Chris rushed forward and knelt in the snow. Prancer! The wound was jagged as if made by something dull. Chris stood and took in his surroundings, listening. On the howling wind there came the sound of a wicked laugh. Slowly Chris edged towards the back of the sleigh. The laugh came again. The teetering, high-pitched chuckle of a madman. Chris rounded the rear of the sleigh to a shocking sight. It was one of the toy clowns that had been stuffed in the sack, only it was different now. It had become something of flesh and blood. Its face twisted and demonic under the happy red face paint and tufts of red hair. In its hand was a small knife, and as Chris watched in horror, the clown cut a ragged strip of meat off Prancer's severed neck and shoved it in his mouth. Then it stopped, suddenly aware that Chris was watching, and charged with a scream. Chris backed away and lost his footing in the snow. He landed on his back, and the clown was on him. No more than 4 feet tall, Chris was able to swat the thing away, but not before the knife found his right shoulder. The clown was coming again. It brought the knife across Chris's rosy red cheek. Chris flinched back at the backswing and was suddenly missing a part of his beard. Before the clown could attack again, Chris wrapped one meaty hand around its small head and drove it to the brick chimney. The skull popped and the thing blackened, but foul brains splattered over Chris's arm. Chris looked around and worked to catch his breath. He had assumed the creature crawled out of the sack in mid-flight. As for how he'd come to be possessed, Chris hadn't the slightest idea. He thought he wanted to take the time to mourn poor Prancer properly. The children were expecting him, and the night's deliveries must go on. He picked the sack up again and jumped to the next rooftop. Down another chimney, Chris stumbled into the living room to find a small girl on the sofa, startled to wakefulness by the appearance of the fabled man she'd tried to wait up for. "Santa?" the girl mumbled. "Why are you bleeding?" Chris cleared his throat. "Oh, fine little one. Just got caught in a chimney flue." "Oh." "Now go back to sleep and have a very Merry Christmas." The girl smiled and closed her eyes. Chris placed the girl's toys around the tree and was back up the chimney. The blizzard was growing worse. Chris trudged his way to the edge of the roof, but stopped when the sack on his back jolted and flew from his hands. He turned to find something within the sack was moving, then realized it was in fact several somethings. Demonic clown dolls, one after another, emerged from the magical sack, each chuckling their mad laughter, each wielding a long knife, their faces twisted and wrong. Chris looked beyond them to the sleigh. It was his only hope. He had to get back to the sleigh. The clowns kept jumping out of the seemingly bottomless bag, an army of aggressive, insane assassins set to what? Why were they here? Where did they come from? Chris suddenly had a theory, but he'd first have to get out of this mess to prove it. Free from the sack, the army of demonic clowns rushed forward. Chris turned and jumped to the next roof, moving away from the sleigh as the last thing he wanted, but it was the only option at the moment. Chris ran along the housetop as fast as he could. The snow was deep and slowed him considerably, while the demonic clowns had no trouble. Their light weight allowed them to practically run on top of the powder. Chris came to the chimney with a horde of clowns hot in his tails. He slid around the brick base and circled to the other side with his shoulder low. He plowed into the group of clowns and managed to get through them, but not without harm. Chris suffered a slash across his belly and several on his arms and legs. The damage was worth it, however, for now the sleigh was in front of him like a beacon of hope. He leapt to the neighboring house, slid slightly, and jumped over his sack. The clowns had regrouped and were quickly gaining on him. He took the next gap between houses and slid to a stop at the rear of the sleigh. Chris then bumped his gloved fist against the hidden release switch at the door, and the door popped open. He reached in and pulled the item from inside. The battle axe was massive. And even Kris Kringle, with his huge size and strong arms, had to lift it with two hands. With the first swing of the axe, Chris took down four clowns. The blade was kept sharp, and it cut through flesh with ease. The snowy rooftop was sprayed with dark blood and rotted entrails. Chris's backswing removed the head of another clown and sliced through the sternum of one leaping for attack. Chris let out a primal scream and brought the axe down through the head of another clown, splitting him in half. He felt a stab in his side and elbowed a clown away. Another swing of the blade dropped three more, but there were just so many. He had the size advantage, but they were quickly overpowering him. He chopped down four more. The snow around him was piled high with dismembered limbs and rotted guts, the dead bodies of demonic clowns. The knives cut into him. Kris Kringle's screams and the mad laughter of the clowns was lost in the harsh blizzard winds. Loken sat back in his chair and smiled. As head elf, he was next in line to take the mantle of Santa Claus. Old Chris had held on to it for far too long. Soon, Christmas would be his, and he would mold it into his own image. He checked his watch. The time was upon them. Chris should be back, but there was no sign of him. Loken had plotted this move carefully since the day after Christmas last year, and now it had all paid off. The double doors to the shop floor slammed open. Loken turned and was horrified to see a slashed and badly wounded Kris Kringle walking through the doorway, covered in gore, a massive battle axe in one hand, blade dragged along the floor, dripping with black blood. Loken felt his heart sink as the large man spoke. I've led the wild hunt on Yule, riding the wind along the treetops, bled on the battlefields alongside gods. Do you really think your experiment with dark magic would be my undoing? Loken stammered but couldn't form any words. I defeated your horde of demon clouds and still finished my deliveries. Now I've come for you. Loken tried to get away, tried to move his feet, crouch into the fetal position, anything to avoid what was coming, but fear had him in an icy grip. Chris hefted the axe high above his head, and let out a battle cry. The last thing Logan saw was the axe blade as it was buried in his skull. Dun, 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 dun. Yeah, it's pretty epic, Kris Kringle. Hell yeah, Santa's a badass. I mean, honestly, you'd think he would have to be. I mean, the dude delivers presents to every kid on the planet in like a single night, you know? Yeah, it was a good story, Jack. Thank you. Like, he would have to be a badass. There's no way Santa's not a badass. The next story is called Apparition. It was written by D.A. Snyder. This one is also written by D.A. Snyder. Jack said all three of these ones are. The empty room was thick with an eerie silence I'd never experienced before. I sat against the wall with legs splayed on the floor, a beer in one hand and my smartphone in the other. Reese had just called with the usual message. I'm sorry, Ben, I have to work late again. My wife, the lawyer. At that point, we hadn't had dinner together in 2 weeks. So I sat, alone, and buzzing in the empty living room of our new Soho apartment with the definite sense that something was off. The place was creepy. For the first time, I understood the phrase, the silence was deafening. A woman's face suddenly swam into view in my mind. She was pretty and brunette, and when she spoke, she whispered only two words. Kiss me. I woke up in bed to the sound of the doorbell ringing. Reese was stirring next to me, and I couldn't help feeling a little disoriented. I swung my feet off the bed and stood, my lower back screaming with stiffness from the moving the bedroom set the day before. Who could that be at 8 o'clock in the morning? My wife asked as she stood to follow me. I don't know, I replied, pulling my jeans on. How'd I get into bed? She let out a little giggle that I'd always loved. I helped you. You were out on the living room floor when I got home. I noticed for the first time a slight pounding in my head. I guess I had a few too many beers. I shuffled down the hall with Reese close behind me and peered through the peephole. I recognized the man on the other side as Mr. Steinman, the landlord and repairman, but there were others with him I didn't know. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door. Good morning, a middle-aged woman sang. She was holding a casserole dish that was covered with oil. We thought we'd stop by and say welcome to the building, and we'd like to invite the both of you to my apartment for a little welcoming party, complete with breakfast and gifts. That's very kind of you, I said, and just as I was about to decline the offer, my wife cut in. We'd be delighted, wouldn't we, honey? She she gave me a light punch with us on the small of my back that surely went unnoticed by the group. Of course we would, I lied. Reese pulled on her robe and we followed the residents down the hall to the woman's apartment. Once inside, I noticed how lavishly decorated the place was. The fireplace mantel held two ornate candle holders on either side of a Chinese dragon statue that looked as if it should be in a museum. The furniture was finely crafted with woodwork that clearly wasn't manufactured on any factory floor. The dining room set was polished to a bright shine with high backed chairs and a heavy oak table that was adorned with a china set that looked as if it may have cost more than the apartment. Welcome to my home, the woman said. I'm Charlotte Templeton. She held out a hand and Reese took it. Reese Wilson and my husband, Detective Ben Wilson. Oh, a detective, Miss Templeton said with glee. What kind of detective? Homicide, I said, feeling more and more uncomfortable among the strangers and wishing my wife hadn't felt the need to add my fairly new rank with the NYPD. How wonderful, the older woman said before continuing with the introductions. This is Todd Jennings and his life partner, Rick Wade. I shook hands with the interracial gay couple, thinking the two of them had no doubt faced their share of challenges in their lives as a couple and individuals, even in a city as liberal as New York. This is Lisa Stone and her husband Lee, the woman went on. The Stones looked like the typical power couple. He was probably a stock trader, and she was most likely in advertising or publishing. And of course, you know our Mr. Steinman, Miss Templeton finished. I nodded to the landlord, and he nodded back. I know it's a little unorthodox, but we always welcome new tenants with a little breakfast together. It's become a tradition, and we enjoy being different. Well, it helps that her specialty dish is this amazing breakfast casserole, Todd Jennings added. Miss Templeton laughed and waved him away with fake modesty. After the introduction, she spooned out the casserole onto the plates, and we all sat down at the table. The welcoming party doled out boring information about themselves, and the conversations were laced with the usual overused platitudes that made meeting new people so unbearable to me. Once we were done with breakfast, Miss Templeton offered coffee. I'd love to stay, said Reese, and I immediately felt grateful to the woman. I loved I immediately felt grateful to the woman I loved for getting us away from the other residents. But I'm afraid, sorry, I got to scroll down. But I'm afraid I have to get ready for work. Though Ben is off today, I'm sure he'd be glad to stay for coffee. What a bitch! I looked at her in shock. She excused herself and told everyone it was nice meeting them. I insisted on walking her out. Why would you do this to me? I whispered once we were near the door. You know I hate people. Consider it payback for recording over Pitch Perfect with a Yankees game. That's not my fault. There are too many Lifetime movies on the DVR. You recorded them and never watched them. Besides, they were playing the Red Sox. The Red Sox! She giggled again and said with a final note of triumph, Have fun with your new friends. Then she kissed me and left the apartment. I stood there a moment, plotting some sort of revenge. Then my phone chimed a single text. It was Reese. Don't forget the furniture will be delivered between noon and 4. I'll be there, I responded, then returned to the dining area. The coffee was welcomed, even if the company wasn't. Eventually, I told the group I was expecting the furniture delivery far earlier than I was actually expecting it and managed to get away. I went back to our apartment and went to work mounting the TV to the wall using a stud finder that was wrong 7 times before it was finally right. Then I connected the TV to the satellite and put on the recoded game that had landed me in hot water with the wife. The furniture didn't arrive until after 8 p.m., noon for my ass. Reese was working late again. She sent me a text promising that she would be off for the weekend, and once her current case ended, so too would the late nights. I was in the bathroom about to shower when I heard something from the kitchen, the sound of a chair being pulled across the linoleum floor. I walked down the hall and into the kitchen. We had a small breakfast table with 2 chairs, and one was pulled away from the table. I stood quiet for a moment, looking, listening, then walked over to the chair and pushed it back in. I made the same It made the same sound I heard moments ago, and wondered if someone was in the house with me. Maybe Reese had snuck in to mess with me or for her lost singing movie. Oh, maybe Reese had snuck in to mess with me more for her lost singing movie. I stepped back through the swinging door and into the living room, looking around at the new furniture and freshly mounted TV. Reese? I called out, my voice sounding hollow and uncertain in my own ears. The sound came again from the kitchen, this time longer and louder, as if the chair was being pulled out slowly to make a point. No wife here. I turned and stared at the swinging door. I had to will my feet to step forward and into the kitchen. When I opened the door and looked in, the chair had been moved back again. I slowly walked forward to the chair, realizing I was trembling a little and finding it hard to swallow. Finally, I let out a deep breath and told myself I was being stupid. I reached out to push the chair in, and it was ripped away from my grasp by some unseen force, banging against the wall and tipping over on its side. I stumbled backward, falling to the floor. My heart was pounding, breathing coming in short spurts. I was going to pass out. I could feel it, but I couldn't accept it. Sure, it was something that only happened in movies, just like ghosts, my mind insisted. I crawled out of the kitchen on all fours. Somehow I managed to stay conscious and move to the front door. I decided I was tired and needed to get out, get away from the apartment, and have a few beers to clear my mind. That was all I needed. I hit a local sports bar and had a few beers. 2 hours later, I returned to the apartment and went to the kitchen. The chair was pushed in as if it had never been moved at all. I tried to tell myself that was the case. I was tired from the move. I had imagined the entire thing, but I knew that wasn't right. I left the kitchen and went to bed. Sleep didn't come for a while. The next morning, I woke up and got dressed for work. Reese was snoring away beside me. Her blonde hair was a disheveled mess around her pillow. I left quietly and took the elevator into the lobby. When the doors opened, I found the landlord, Mr. Steinman, pulling a trash bag from a can by the far wall. "Good morning, detective," the old man said. "Off to make our off to make our city a safer place, I see. That's the goal," I replied. "Well, hey, be careful out there, huh? Get it?" I shook my head. Hill Street Blues? It was a great television series. The captain would say that every episode. Must have missed that one. Ah, the landlord said in disgust. By the way, if you really want to get in good with the other tenants, you should send them thank you cards for that little welcoming party. They're into that kind of stuff. Thanks for the tip. I took a step towards the door, then turned back to Mr. Steinman. Hey, I was wondering who lived in the apartment before my wife and I moved in? A young girl, Sarah Wall. She was an artist. Damn good one, too. What happened to her? The landlord seemed hesitant. Well, she was murdered right here in the apartment. No one has lived there in nearly 2 years, but you've already signed a lease. You can't get out of it now. No, 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 of course not, I said, but my mind was beginning to move on to other things. I bid the landlord goodbye and went to work. It was a slow day, full of paperwork and too much coffee, but my thoughts kept returning to Sarah Walsh. Finally, I decided to look into the case myself. The file wasn't very thick. It was mostly made up of crime scene photos, paperwork that chalked the murder up to a B&E gone bad, and no suspect was ever apprehended. The case had gone cold. Therefore, I figured no one would mind if I took the file home with me and gave it a deeper look. Once I was home, I grabbed a beer and a sandwich and spread the file contents on the coffee table. Sarah Walsh had died of blunt force trauma to the head. The window of the fireplace had been pried open, and the burglar apparently hadn't expected the artist to be home. However, I found there were quite a few things that didn't fit. For one, nothing was missing from the apartment. This was attributed to the unexpected appearance of Sarah Walsh in her home. In fact, the only thing that was missing was the murder weapon, and said murder weapon had left a very distinct pattern in Sarah's bashed skull, a diamond within a circle, a shape that seemed familiar to me, though I couldn't quite place where I'd seen it. There were no prints left behind by the killer, no hairs either. Nothing was found but prints and hair follicles from the neighbors, who, from the interviews, were all very friendly with Sarah Wash and had frequently stopped by for coffee or wine or dinner. There was also no signs of a struggle. This, plus the location of the injury at the back of the skull, suggested the killer had snuck up behind the victim in the kitchen where she had been found. One thing bothered me about that. I stood and walked to the kitchen door. When I pushed it open, the hinges gave a loud squeak. There was no way someone could have snuck up on her. This suggested to me she knew the person in her house that night and trusted that person. And furthermore, it meant one of my neighbors was a killer. Reese was running late again. I went to bed that night, angry with my missing wife and concerned about living in the same building with someone capable of murder. Eventually, I drifted off to an uneasy sleep. The clock on my nightstand read 11:15 when I felt Reese lie down in the bed next to me. I pretended I was still asleep as my anger with her hadn't quite abated. After a few minutes, I dozed off again. I woke up again to my phone ringing. It was nearly 1 in the morning, and I had no doubt I was being called out to a fresh murder scene. It had already happened twice before in my short time as a detective. I answered the phone, still half asleep, and I was surprised to hear my wife's voice on the other end. Ben, I'm sorry to wake you, but my car won't start. I need you to come get me. I was confused to say the least. Reese? Was all I could manage. Slowly, as if I were moving through a vat of maple syrup, I turned to look at the other side of the bed, assuming I had dreamt my wife had already come home and crawled into bed with me. My breath hitched in my throat. A female shape beside me was buried under the comforter. Nothing but a mop of dark hair could be seen in the pillow. From far away, I was vaguely aware of my wife repeating my name on the phone line, growing increasingly concerned. I was out of bed, dropping the phone on the nightstand, and pulled my service pistol from the drawer. With the gun in my right hand, I reached slowly with my left. I grabbed the comforter and pulled it inch by inch away from the sleeping form. I noticed her side moving up and down as if she were breathing. The back of her head came into view, and I saw a wound, round and bloody with a diamond shape in the middle. I dropped the blanket when I heard the whimpering. Then I realized the sound was coming from me. When the woman in my bed began to stir, I thought I would surely lose my mind. I couldn't look away as she got up on one elbow and turned to look at me. As she whispered two words, blood spilled from her mouth. Kiss me. I started screaming and I couldn't stop. I stumbled from the room and out of the front door, slamming it behind me. In the hall, I continued to scream uncontrollably. My neighbors were opening their doors and looking out into the hall. I suddenly realized I was on the floor, hands pulling at my own hair, with several possible killers staring at me as if I were a lunatic. I stood and looked at them. I'd not met any of them yet, as they weren't a part of the welcoming party, but I knew that they must have been what they must have been thinking. Sorry, bad dream, was all I could manage. I re entered the apartment and crept back into the bedroom. The bed was empty. I searched the rest of the apartment and found no one. The windows were locked, the closets were clear. I jumped when my phone rang again. Ben, what is going on? My wife asked with concern. Um, I said, still scanning the room for movement. I'll tell you when I get there. I'm on my way. I ended the call, grabbed my keys and phone, and walked out. I'm sorry, I didn't feel comfortable taking a cab this late, Reese said as she climbed into the car. Oh my God, you look terrible. What happened? There's something in our house, I said. What, like a rat? No, like a dead girl. What? I told her everything, including my run in with a murder victim earlier that night. When I was done, she rubbed a hand through my hair and over my neck as if a child whose dog had just ran away. Sweetie, I'm sure it was just a bad dream. I shook my head. I know it's hard to believe, but all the freaky ghost stuff aside, this murder hasn't been solved, and the detective that was working the case was about 2 weeks away from retirement. I met the guy when I first joined the force. He wasn't exactly putting his all into the job. Well, I'm off this weekend, just like I promised. How about I help you solve this one? We can have a few beers, and I'll be your partner for a couple of days. It'll be fun. I agreed to her offer and was actually thankful for the help. A fresh set of eyes could help immensely in figuring out what really happened the night Sarah Walsh was killed. Once we were home, Reese began pulling her clothes off. I'm going to take a shower and we can get started on the case in the morning. Okay, baby. A few minutes later, I heard the shower shut off and Reese urgently shouting for me. I ran to the bathroom and pushed the door open. Reese pointed to the mirror. On the steamed up glass, an invisible finger was writing a message. When it was done, Reese read it aloud. Kiss me. Then the mirror broke on its own in a spider web of cracks, forcing a scream from Reese. I looked at my wife, asking without saying a word if she believed me. She nodded. Maybe we should get started on this case tonight. Once she was dressed, she went through the file. I spread the photos out again and told her my theory of the squeaking kitchen door. So you think she knew the killer? She asked. Right. I also think this person came here under the guise of friendship. Look at this photo. Sarah Walsh was found in the kitchen, but you can see the countertop here. Okay, what am I supposed to see? The coffee maker. The coffee grounds spilled across the counter. She was in the middle of making coffee for a guest. Reese let out a gasp. So the killer came in through the kitchen door, maybe slinging a little small talk, and whack. Exactly what I was thinking. But what about the break-in? Maybe it was a setup. Reese picked up the photos of the window off the fire escape that was pried from open from the sill. Then she stood as if she had an epiphany and walked to the window to investigate. I followed her, and when she threw the window open, I had the idea what she was looking for. Look, she said, pointing to the windowsill. The sill wasn't replaced, only painted over. You can still see the groove where the window was pried open. I ran my finger along the groove, as if the killer used a pry bar, but from the inside to fake a break in. Noticing. We were quiet for a moment, pondering the possibilities. Wait, I said. She was an artist. So? A sculptor, to be exact. She caught on. She caught what I. She caught what I was tossing at her. She would have any number of chisels laying around. Right, one of them could have easily been used to pry open the window. Then the killer just replaces it with the rest of the art supplies, and an old detective that's way past his prime never even considers it. So we've established that someone she knew that came in acting as a friend. What motive would this person have to kill her? Maybe that's what Sarah is trying to tell us, Reeves pointed out. I shook my head, but not catching on right away. Kiss me. That's all she keeps saying. Kiss me. A former lover, I said with a grin. We both returned to the file. The police had questioned an ex-boyfriend, but they were 6 months apart by then, and he alibied out. It appeared Sarah hadn't been very active in the dating scene in the weeks leading up to her death. What now? Reese asked. Well, we'll just start with the neighbors. That would be the easiest way to go. She knew all of them, but only the ones that lived here at the time were Mr. Steinman, Miss Templeton, and Todd and Rick, the gay couple. They all seem unlikely as possible lovers. Well, you never know, but how do we go about getting into their houses and looking around? It only took a second for that to come to me. Thank you cards. Since we'd already been in Miss Templeton's apartment, and I'd done plenty of looking around and noticed nothing out of the ordinary besides overly pretentious furniture, upon my return home from the work the next evening, we made our way to Mr. Steinman's place on the first floor. The apartment was the exact opposite of Miss Templeton's, with clutter everywhere and furniture that was old but far from valuable to anyone but its owner. The old man seemed on the verge of being one of those hoarders you see on TV shows. After we handed him the thank you card, he insisted that we didn't need to bother bringing him one as he led us into the living room. The landlord had an uncle living with him and that had lost both his arms up to the elbow. It was a freak accident if there ever was one, the old man told us while out of Uncle Herman's earshot. He used to have a house in the suburbs. Day after Independence Day, he's mowing his lawn and he runs over an unused rocket shaped firework. I don't know what they're called. Anyway, the powder in the thing sparked and the gas in the mower ignited and the whole damn thing blew to hell. Took his arms right off. We agreed it was an awful story, and somehow Mr. Steinman been the family had been the family member stuck looking after the poor old guy. However, while we were there, the uncle did nothing but berate and make demands of the landlord. After I used a trip to the bathroom to look around, Reese and I said our goodbyes and stepped out into the hall. What do you think? Reese asked. I couldn't find anything, I said, and if he's going to kill anyone, it would be most likely be belligerent old Uncle Herman. Right. On to the next suspects? Yeah. Todd and Rick appreciated our thank you cards so much that they invited us in for coffee. Excuse me. Their place was neat and clean, the furniture much more modern than the other two suspects. After my first cup of coffee, I excused myself to snoop around the apartment under the guise of using the bathroom while my wife talked to the two men about planning a day of shopping together. Finally, we left at once in the hall. Finally, we left, and once in the hall, Reese asked me, Did you find anything of interest? Nothing besides ED pills in the medicine cabinet. I really can't see either one of them having an affair with Sarah Wash. They're far too happy together. Plus, they're gay. Right. We returned to our police. We returned to our place in silence and plopped down on the couch to look over the photos again. What do we do now? Reese asked. Well, now I suppose we should look at the neighbors that have left the building since. In response to this idea, a candle jar whipped off our coffee table and shattered against the wall. My heart was racing, and Reese had gone completely pale. I don't think she likes that idea, Reese speculated. Is she saying that it has to be one of the four suspects still here? That's what I'm guessing. I sighed heavily, fearing that we could be haunted by the apparition for the rest of our lives. Reese rubbed my shoulder, and I ordered a pizza. I'll order a pizza for dinner, and we'll get back at it. I nodded. I'll clean up the mess in a few. Want a beer? Sure, I said. She went to the kitchen and came back with two bottles. Besides the crazy ghosts, I'm really enjoying this, working with my hubby on a murder case. We should do it more often. I laughed. We could quit our jobs and go into business as paranormal investigators, or just private investigators. I looked at her with surprise. You're serious? Well, not about quitting our jobs part, but maybe here and there taking on private clients, solving cases together. I shrugged, warming up to the idea. Maybe we should. You know what this reminds me of? She laughed. Remember that old board game Clue? My beer stopped halfway to my lips. With one question my wife had jogged loose, the one thing my mind was having trouble grasping. My eyes found the shattered candle in the corner, and it solidified my thoughts. I put my beer down and shuffled through the photos, finally pulling one that showed the head wound on Sarah Walsh. What is it? I know who did it. Who? I stood, grabbed my holstered gun and my handcuffs, and placed them both in my belt. Follow me, I said, unable to control the smile spreading across my face at the excitement I was feeling. Down the hall and to the right, I knocked on the closed door. When the door opened, I smiled. Miss Templeton, we brought you a thank you card. How wonderful, the woman said. Please come in. We entered the home upon her invitation. I strode directly to the fireplace. When I, when I spoke, it was to my wife. When you mentioned the game Clue, everything fell into place for me. What's going on? Miss Templeton asked. I ignored her. It was Miss Templeton in the kitchen with the candlestick. With that, I reached up to one of the ornate candle holders and turned it around the mantel, revealing the pattern on the other side, a diamond with a circle. Oh my God, Reese said. I continued. I knew I recognized that pattern from somewhere, and it turns out it was right here. Even though I just glimpsed it in the mirror above the mantel, it stuck. Such details usually do with homicide detectives. What are you saying? Miss Templeton asked, but blood rushing to her face told me she already knew what I was getting at. You killed Sarah Walsh, Reese answered. The woman seemed lost for words, so I filled in the blanks. During the original investigation, the police couldn't find any recent boyfriends for Sarah. That's because she was having an affair with a woman. That woman was you, Miss Templeton. It was a relationship you wished to keep secret for whatever reason, and both of you did a great job doing so. Only while you were growing more committed, Sarah was young and still experimenting sexually. Eventually, she called it off, but you weren't ready for that. Maybe you tried to convince her otherwise, but she wasn't listening. But how did she get the drop on her? My wife asked. That's easy. One day, Miss Templeton showed up at Sarah's door with a offering, an antique candlestick as a gift, insisting that she was over it and she just didn't want to lose Sarah as a friend. Poor, trusting Sarah invited her in and offered her coffee. While she made the coffee, Miss Templeton kept her talking, perhaps about the weather or the latest episode of Grey's Anatomy, as she came up behind her and caved her head in with a candlestick. Then she used one of Sarah's sculpting tools to pry the window open and make it look like a break in gone wrong. Miss Templeton was in shock. How did you know all this? I pointed to myself with both thumbs. Detective. I placed her in cuffs and had Reese call 911. My wife was in awe. I explained to her now I concocted most of the story based on Miss Templeton's personality and what I knew about the young artistic types, particularly in New York City. I could tell she was impressed, and later that night she showed me just how impressed. We never heard anything more from the ghost of Sarah Walsh, but when we returned to our apartment, when we returned to our apartment, we noticed the bathroom mirror was no longer broken. That's it. That's that story. Oh, that's a pretty good story too. Yeah, DA is a good writer, man. For sure. Though I knew it was Miss Templeton the whole time. Like right from the get go, I knew it was Miss Templeton. I don't know why, but I did. Hello, Sue Nelson. Thanks for coming. Detective Crow. Oh, that is so true too. But I'm not going to go into details about all that. I can't. It's an ongoing case. There is no lies and propaganda with Crow, sir. No. Crow has much insight. It's in there somewhere. I don't know where, but it's somewhere. Damn it. What? Do I work for the FBI? Yes. No, I don't. Whoa, whoa, Jack. I thought we were friends. Bro. Come on. Lies and propaganda. Like I would ever. Seaman. Hey, Paranormal Stephanie, what's up? I still got one more story to read. Unless somebody else wants to send me another story, then I'll read more stories. Having a good night so far. I don't see any reason why to quit, right? Yeah. Except my neck is a little stiff. Milk. I'm sorry, but milk does a body good. Okay. Boob milk? Oh, scary milk. I see you. What's up? Scary milk. Are you lactose intolerant? Is that why milk is so frightening to you? It would make sense. Though, your significant other might be more frightened of milk if you're lactose intolerant because of the reaction you may have. This next story by D.A. Snyder is called Musical Graves. I don't know, poor Drag. Poor Drag's unamused here. I'm going to smoke my cigarette and chat with you peoples for a moment before I really start getting into this. I'm going to lean back in my chair like I'm relaxing. I'm going to pull back the mic. Yes. If you planted trees with ashes of people on an acre of cleared land, years later the trees are very tall. Do you think that the forest of trees be called a haunted forest? Well, that kind of depends. That depends on a lot of things. First of all, did the people want to be buried with a bunch of trees? If I need a what, Johnny? I need a what? Anyways, as I was deducting, if the people did not mind getting buried within the forest, then I would assume that they would not be haunting it. Yeah, of course I have a pipe. I even have another one. But this one is clearly my detective pipe. But yeah, I wouldn't think that somebody would haunt the forest if they were okay with having that happen to them. The cane's over there. And it's not a pimp cane. It's just a wooden stick, really. But it's a cane. I'm not gonna go get it though. I don't really use it if I'm like in my room or in the house. Yes, it's a tobacco pipe. This is not. You should be wearing your cape, Haley. You look beautiful in that cape, anyways. Hashtag jealous. Aw, see, Drac wishes he looked beautiful in that cape. I wouldn't think that'd be a bad idea, honestly, TS. I wouldn't mind if my ashes were put into something that would later be a forest, but I would want it to also be like an edible forest. Like everything that's planted in this forest is edible plants. Oh, I'm sorry that I'm telling people about your super freaking sexy, hot superwoman role play. She's fucking hot. Yeah, I wanna be all up inside people, like I'll just inside them. You know what I mean? Now, when I say people, I mean Haley. Hey, Deadpool is hilarious. See, I might tell creepy stories and everything else, but actually, I'm a weird, goofy guy. I'm a very weird, goofy guy. I'm always joking around, except when I'm not. But other than that, I'm always joking around. All right, I'm almost done with my cigarette. I apologize. I will be back to telling scary stories very soon. Musical graves. I assume this will be somewhat of a musical chairs story, but people are, trying to get in a grave. Well, this is a pretty long one, Jack. Good Lord. It doesn't end. It never ends. Oh, it ends. Way down there. It's a long one. Yeah, Jack does like long ones. You're someone's MCM? What is an MCM? I don't know what an MCM is. Scary Milk. What is an MCM, man? No, I'll read it, Jack. Oh, I'll read it. Yeah, no, that's cool, Jack. I'll read it. All right, my cigarette's gone, so I'm going to start. Man Crush Monday. Oh, okay. Well, how am I supposed to know that? I don't know that. What do I know about Man Crush Monday? Musical graves. A graveyard is the settling for the opening chapter of this tale, is the setting, not settling. An unassuming place, to be sure, but one filled with a gloom that can only come from an October night that holds only a sliver of moon in its blackened sky. On a night like tonight, the chilly autumn wind blows through the hollows of the trees in and around the cemetery grounds. Some have been known to mistake the sound for the melancholy cries of ghosts that had been long dead and anchored to their final resting places. However, this is only half right. In truth, the sound is that of the music these spirits have written themselves, like a supernatural jam band that draws its inspiration from the weaving dives of the wicked wind. The life of a ghost is a lonely one. Well, leastways, it was for David. The graveyard he resided in was full of lively spirits, and they seemed to throw a party almost nightly. The kind of ethereal jamborees that include jokes, laughter, and aforementioned music played in insubstantial instruments. All right, Drac, if I miss you when you go, I'll say goodbye now. Yeah, I mean, Jack is my man crush at all times. Try as he might, David found it rather difficult to join in the festivities. Like many ghosts, he had unattended business to see to in the earth realm. The other spirits seemed to find it easy to look past this, but for David, that unattainable goal seemed to be all he could think about. It was like a plate of food that was just out of a starving man's reach. Now, Jack's just a good friend of mine, Drac. Don't be jealous, it's okay. Of course, the most raucous, raucous, the most, I don't know, parties occurred when a new spirit joined them in their little community. This would happen quite often as well, at least once or twice a week. Dustin. Some time ago, David was elected to the position of mayor of a large cemetery, a title he no doubt earned through his dry and dreary demeanor. The other ghosts felt he was the only one serious enough to make important decisions when the time came to do so. These moments were few and far between, to be sure. After all, what kind of decisions could a society full of ghosts possibly deem to be a matter of importance? Why, he couldn't remember the last time anyone asked for his advice on any topic. But I digress. It was the parties that we were getting to. Upon ending these parties, the ghosts would usually split into pairs. Most often one male and one female, but this wasn't always the case, and lie down in one grave together. This was a practice that seemed odd to David. Surely two ghosts couldn't pleasure each other in any way. That's not that's not to say he wasn't curious. It was never the same couples either. The whole thing seemed like a morbid game to David. He could sometimes imagine an old record player, for those were standard when he was alive, playing a tune from a big band of a long gone era. Then the music would stop and the spirits would fall into their graves with whomever happened to be closest, musical graves. I was right. He would often laugh at this comparison. Then he would remember when he was always the odd ghost out, and his smile would fade. These ghosts would spend their entire daylight hours in the grave, though not for reasons you might think. Being so transparent, ghosts weren't easily seen in the light of the sun, not even by other ghosts, so there was really very little point in it. Anyone who has seen a ghost could tell you. The dead usually wear their deaths on their sleeve, so to speak. It was no different for David, who made his way through post life with a cloud of smoke billowing away from his backside. Even his hair was nothing more than a stream of gray smokiness. Add to all this the perpetual cigarette that was always held clutched between his thumb and middle finger. It was clear to see his demise was caused some way by his love of tobacco. Even though he had been dead for nearly 70 years, the cigarette still fascinated him. No matter how many times he smoked it down to the filter and flicked it away, as soon as he turned his hand back over, the square would reappear, full and freshly lit. So he would smoke it, and he would enjoy it. Then he would toss it away and start all over again. With his enjoyment of cigarettes, he supposed it wasn't totally unreasonable for that the other ghosts would enjoy whatever it was that they did when they joined one another in the same graves in the early morning hours. Or was it his enjoyment of the cigarette purely a mental level? Each His train of thought often went in this direction, and the questions would turn over and over in his head, tumbling through his ghostly psyche like a child tumbling down a grassy hill on a sunny afternoon, until they threatened to drive him mad. The truth was, David was far too tightly wound for a spirit. He didn't remember being that way in life. As a matter of fact, he could remember being a fairly carefree person. His existence and death seemed to revolve around worry and incessant thinking. Most of the time, he wasn't even sure what time it was. Most of the time, he wasn't even sure what it was he was worrying about. But far be it from him to be the downer of the party. More often than not, when the good times began, he would fade into the background and pretend he didn't exist at all. That was the way death went for David for nearly 60 years, until the day she showed up. There's always a she, isn't there? It was on one of those chilly October nights that she came. A night when a cold drizzled rain came down from the dark clouds, and every ghost in the graveyard longed to feel its wet kiss on their skin just one last time, like the longing for a lover's touch that will never be experienced again. When night fell, a rather large community of ghosts gathered around a cluster of headstones and waited for the new ghost to awaken. David wandered over to Miss Blovenstein, Blo- Blovelstein, and stood next to her, staring off at the freshly covered grave that so successfully caught the attention of every ghost in the place. "Another new arrival?" David questioned in a voice that revealed he wasn't in the least bit interested. "They seem to come more and more frequently these days." "Things are worse than they used to be," Mrs. Blovenstein responded. "Things always get worse out there. They never seem to get any better." David had always had the utmost respect for the specter he was standing next to. She had survived the Holocaust and made it to America, only to die of pneumonia 3 weeks after she arrived. Born and raised in Poland, she was sort of a kindred spirit to David, seeing as she was one of the few in the graveyard, along with David himself, of course, that hailed from Europe. With daylight faded when daylight faded completely, the community of ghosts watched as a young lady that had been freshly buried that day crawled from her grave. Not her earthly body, mind you, but a faded white virgin that seemed to move as if it were living smoke. She hung there loosely for a moment, then quickly came together into a tighter form. The new ghost looked down at her hands, examined them a moment, then looked at the others in confusion. "What's happened to me?" she asked in a scared whisper. "Who are you people?" "Come on, dear," Miss Blovelstein said. "We'll help you through this." As the ghost led her away, David only stood and stared at the girl. And when their eyes locked, the British spirit knew that if he'd had any breath to take away, she'd have certainly taken it all. After explaining to the young woman what was happening to her, the ghost assembled a grand party to celebrate her life and rejoice at the beginning of her death. David sat aside from the party, wanting desperately to join in this time, but unable to do anything more than stare at the lovely newcomer. Before long, she was taken in by the fun, as most ghosts were, and joined the others in their dance. Twirling and jumping in her pretty white dress, she was the perfect picture of beauty and grace, shining by the moon's light. Every once in a while, she would steal a glance his way and smile. He would smile back just faintly, even though on the inside he thought he might titter away, laughing his head off like a madman. When the party had finally begun to wind down, David saw his chance to speak with the pretty ghost. "Hello," he said, walking up beside her as she on a gravestone. I think it should say sat, maybe? "My name is David." He, he held out his hand, and she delicately placed hers in his. He had a mind to kiss her knuckle, then remembered that she had come from a different age, and thought better of it. "I'm Sabrina," the girl said. Her voice was a light sweetness, like a sprinkle of sugar over a warm apple pie. "Sabrina," David said with a smile.
Would you like to take a walk with me? She returned the smile. I would love to. David held out his arm, and the girl placed her hand through the rest in the crook of his elbow. From the corner of his eye, he could see some of the other ghosts nudging each other and pointing in their direction, but he paid them no heed. David led Sabrina to the back of the cemetery, through a thicket of rose bushes, and up a trail that living people often used. The trail opened up after about a quarter of a mile and gave way to a beautiful view. There, on the bay of the Hudson River, he could see the Manhattan skyline in all its luminescent glory. It's beautiful, Sabrina sighed. Do you bring all the new girls up here? To be honest, I've never brought anyone up here, David admitted. It's just some place I like to think. I find it calming. What makes me so special? He studied her face for a long moment. I haven't quite figured that out yet. When you come to this when you come to this revelation, you must fill me in. You should be the first to know, I promise. She looked at him closely. You're a strange sort of ghost with all of that smoke surrounding you. Tell me how you died. David sat down on a large rock, looked out at the blazing lights of the city, and took a drag off of the never ending cigarette between his fingers. I have to admit, that story's a little embarrassing. So? Who are you trying to impress? Well, you. I'm trying to impress you, my dear. She smiled, a perfect smile as far as David was concerned. You've already impressed me, David. He smiled back and said, All right, then, I'll tell you. I'd always been a smoker, started at a very young age, and one night, with a rather restless sort of mind, I began to drink in my room for no other reason than to pass the time. Unfortunately for me, when I finally passed out in bed, I still had a lit cigarette in my hand. I died while smoking in bed. Really? She laughed. Well, that's a silly way to go. Hence my embarrassment, he shrugged. How about you? How did you die? She averted her eyes from his, and her smile faded. Ask me again some other time. I'm sorry, he said, and he realized that he could see no discernible sign of how she went, except for her eyes. They seemed to have dark rings around them. He could see this even in her ghostly state. Was yours embarrassing as well? Not so much, just a little too painful to revisit so soon after it happened. I understand, he said, and moved quickly to change the subject. Tell me what you did in life. I was a teacher. There was a gleam in her eye at this topic. David found it comforting. I loved being a teacher. Second grade. What about you? I had no real job. I was rich. Oh, maybe I should be talking like this then. I had no real job. I was rich. And because I was rich, I spent my life as a socialite, partying and rubbing elbows with movie stars and musicians. You're obviously British. Where exactly are you from? London, born and raised. It wasn't until my parents died and left me my fortune that I came to New York. I fell in love with this city. You remind me of someone, she said suddenly. A movie actor. Oh? Yeah, when I was a girl, my mother watched an old movie every year at Christmas time. The Bishop's Wife and with Cary Grant, with that thin mustache. She looked an awful lot like that man that played the bishop. Oh, what was his name? David Niven? Niven? David answered certainly. Yes, that was it. And you see, you even have the same first name. You're not the first to make that comparison, David pointed out. As a matter of fact, I used to use that similarity to my advantage when it came to members of the opposite sex. You dog, Sabrina said with a smile. So you were quite the ladies' man while you were alive. I suppose I was. Hang on a minute. When exactly were you alive? Oh, I had my accident in the summer of '51. Really? Well, David, I'm afraid nothing could have ever happened between us, she teased. He smiled at her. And why is that, my dear? With such an age difference, I imagine what my parents would think. Then her good humor faltered at the mention of her parents. David said, We were too young to die, weren't we? Yes. she said sadly. Far too young. They were both quiet for a moment until David finally spoke up. The sun is coming up. Best be heading back, I suppose. All right. The two of them walked in silence back down the trail, and when David got up enough courage, he slipped his hand in hers. She took it gladly, and what surprised him the most was that he could feel it, her skin on his, fingers splaying into his own. It felt exquisite. Soon they were standing in front of her freshly covered grave, and she asked, "Where are you buried?" "Just over there," he gestured, "on the other side of that large sycamore tree." "Oh, that looks like a lovely spot." He ran his hand through her hair and marveled at the sensation it sent through his entire body. "You're so much different than the other ghosts that have come here of late. So much more dignified." "Why, thank you," she said with a curtsy to emphasize his point. "Can I see you again tonight?" "I'm sure it'll be hard to avoid seeing one another." With that, they left each other, and David lay down in his cozy grave, but was unable to sleep. On the other side of the graveyard, unbeknownst to all its residents, a mausoleum door slid open with all the patient care of the creature that hid within. From the slight opening in the door, a long, tentacle-like finger made its presence known, searching and probing the world outside. When the thing felt the warmth of the morning sun beating down on its skin, the appendage retreated back into the darkness, and the being waited with unwavering diligence for night to fall. When the sun went down, David climbed out of his grave into the swirling fog that hung over the graveyard, and the first thing he did was look for Sabrina among the members of his old family. The other ghosts the other ghosts were preparing for another night of festivities, and paid little notice to the smoky-haired spirit and his childlike desire to see the new girl. "Hello again," a sweet voice said from behind him. He turned, and there she was, just as pretty as the previous evening, just as sad. He supposed he hadn't noticed it the night before, but there was a sorrowful lilt to her smile. He believed she was genuinely glad to see him, but there was no doubt that something else was weighing heavy on her mind. "What is it, Sabrina?" he asked. "I don't know," she said with a shake of her head. "Perhaps nothing." "Maybe I can help lighten your mood," he said. A little of the sadness seemed to leave her eyes as she replied, "Maybe you can." They began to walk together back towards the others. "I know another party is about to begin," David mentioned. "Do they do this every night?" "Oh, yes. There's not much else to do when you're dead." "Yeah, I guess there wouldn't be. If you'd rather, we could—" "Hello, everyone!" a jolly yet monstrous voice interrupted. A cheer went up, and David smiled. "Ah, Kazul is here. He's great fun. You'll like him." Standing in front of them was the imposing figure of Kazul, the demon. He was a tall, broad-shouldered creature with horns atop his head that weren't really horns at all, no matter how much he insisted otherwise. They stretched back from his forehead, two triangular shapes that laid flat against his head, but moved and pulsated like extra appendages that were only there to protect his exposed skull. The demon's hands were also strange in that he didn't have a full set of fingers. Instead, he had a thumb and an index finger and a third finger that was coiled up under the palm. And when that finger was unfurled, it resembled a long tentacle that David was sure had a great many uses. Hell had always been a little behind in the times on Western culture. This was made evident by the syrup that was wrapped around Kazul's shoulders and the chewed up cigar that was sticking out between his cracked lips. The big thing in the underworld for the past several years was Clint Eastwood and his spaghetti westerns. Kazul! Oh, Kazul! Old Johnny Coalfield, the ghost that still bore the ragged noose around his neck from where he had been falsely accused and hung in 1842 for holding up a bank that killed two men, shouted through his mishmash set of broken teeth. I should give him a totally hick voice. "Oh, it's the life of the party. Do you remember you bring booze? No, no. I won't be getting drunk with you lot tonight, Kazul said. And David once again noticed how strange the thick British accent sounded coming from a demon in Old West attire. I'm on duty. I gotta make him sound like British and dynamic. This is gonna be interesting. I'm on duty. You're on official business, as a matter of fact. Defeated signs from the partying ghost. No, defeated sighs from the partying ghost. What do you need to do here? Johnny asked. Kazoo looked toward David and Sabrina and said, I've come for the new girl. What? David said with confusion. The demon walked over to where they were standing. Sorry, David, old Tom, but she'll have to come with me. But why? Kazoo looked for a moment as if he didn't understand the question, then held out his hands with a shrug and said, She's a suicide, lad. Took a handful of pills. David felt his composure falter. He turned and looked at Sabrina, but she only stared at her feet in shame, unable to meet his eyes. Then he looked back at Kazoo with his mouth moving in an effort to protest, but was unable to form any words. Well, come on with you, girl, the demon said, motioning to her to follow with his odd hand. I've got a lot of night ahead of me. No point in wasting time. Despair flooded into David's guts as Sabrina moved up beside him. I'm so sorry, David, was all she said. See you, Brad. Yet he could still say nothing. He only watched along the other ghost as Sabrina walked alongside the large frame of the demon Kazul and back to the gate. A gate that all the dead citizens of the graveyard knew about, but stayed away from at all costs. When the pair disappeared into the swirling mist, David turned away and pounded an angry fist on a large headstone. This wasn't fair, he thought. How could fate be so cruel to me? How could she have been so cruel? How could she do this to me? The last thought made him feel dirty and wretched inside. He realized then what the real question was. The question he should have been asking immediately after the demon showed up to claim her. How could he allow this to happen to Sabrina? Suddenly, for the first time in his death, he knew for certain what he wanted, what he needed. Sabrina. Don't worry, love, Kazul said as they approached the mausoleum. Things aren't as bad down there as people have been led to believe. I mean, sure, there's some torturing going on. You know, just embalments, toenail pulling, cleansing by fire, and the like. But those things aren't usually reserved for the really bad ones. I'm reasonably sure you won't have to go through any of that stuff. Somehow Sabrina wasn't comforted by this. The heavy cement of the old mausoleum door spoke its hollow, grating language like the growl of some angry fantasy beast, and Sabrina looked down on a blazing red light that illuminated a narrow set of stairs. A steaming hot breeze rushed down the depths and whipped her hair around her head. It's time, love, Kazul said, in a voice that was nearly consoling. Sabrina stepped through the doorway and began to descend the long set of stairs. With each step, the air got hotter, and she noticed with startling clarity it was becoming harder to breathe. Looking down at her hand, she saw that her body was becoming solid and that she quickly starting to resemble the person she was in life. As they made their way down, the staircase gradually widened enough for Kazul to move up and walk beside her. She was thankful for this when something came down beside them, moving incredibly fast, and hit Kazul in the back. Sabrina pressed herself against a wall and watched in shock as a more solid-looking David and an angry Kazul tumbled down the seemingly never-ending set of stairs. David entered the mausoleum with as much speed as he could muster. Running, he knew, was out of the question. The only way he could catch up to the pair before the door was closed was to float, which took him by surprise was the way his body began to solidify as he moved down into the depths of hell. When he ran into the demon, it was more by accident than anything. He had entered the realm with every intention of begging for the girl's soul, But when he became entangled with Kazul and the demon began to fight with him with a furious rage washed over his face, David knew for certain that a fight would suit him just fine. When they finally reached the bottom of the stairs and came to a clearing where the surrounding dead trees glowed like burning embers of a fireplace log, Kazul wrapped one of his tentacle-like fingers around David's throat, and the ghost could actually feel his breath being cut off in his windpipe. With some effort, David pulled back from the demon and brought his fist down, smashing the creature's half-smoked cigar into his teeth. The ghost was surprised to see a spray of blood erupt from Kazul's bottom lip. The demon was able to knock David over and maneuver on top of him. The tentacle around his throat tightened, and David felt the cold wave of unconsciousness threatening to drown him in its black waters. Could he die again? Where would he end up if he could? The possibilities were too frightening to imagine. You got a lot of nerve, little ghost, Kazul growled. David's vision was going black. He clawed weakly at the creature's scaly skin, but knew that he had lost this fight. He supposed he should have expected as much when picking a fight with a demon. Vaguely, he could hear Sabrina pleading for the monster to stop. Enough of this, a deep voice commanded from the edge of the fight. Kazul's grip loosened and the long finger uncoiled from David's neck. Oh, sorry, your lordship, Kazul said. When David's vision finally cleared, he could see that the demon was backing away with a low bow. Looking to the other side of the clearing, he could see an older, well-dressed man approaching them. It appears we have a small situation here, the man said. Meet Lord Lucifer, Kazul said. If it pleases you, I can explain what's going on here. Please do. I was charged with bringing a girl down, the demon explained. David, the ghost here, took it upon himself to try to save the lass. The demon turned his gaze on David. Is this true, David? Yes, David answered in a choked voice. Lucifer smiled. What a noble gesture. Why would you attempt such a foolish feat? David thought about this a moment. He looked back at Sabrina, who appeared to be frightened out of her wits. Then he returned his attention to the devil and said with complete confidence, I love her. Lucifer's smile faded, and he looked closer at the ghost. I know you, David. You're the restless ghost from the graveyard above. How ironic your story has become. Here is a girl that was fated to have her life taken from her in a car accident in just 8 months' time. A girl that was fated to meet you and bring peace to both your uncomfortable death and her chaotic life. A girl that couldn't wait that long and took the easy way out. Lucifer looked at the two of them. David still on the ground and Sabrina now standing at his side, and he seemed to be considering his options for a moment. Then he looked back at Kazul as if he had forgotten the demon was still there. I'm sorry, David, he finally stated. Rules are rules, after all. With that, Lucifer snapped his fingers, and David found himself flat on his back in the dark. It was a dark he knew all too well, the all-encompassing darkness of his coffin. He stood... Oh, I have a neck. He stood as he stood for the past 50-plus years of his death, phasing through the dirt and the rocks and that covered his grave and crawled out into the solid ground. He rushed over to Sabrina's grave marker, ignoring the cries of the other ghost. David, what happened? And David, are you all right? He stopped on the still fresh mound that covered her grave, and he knew that she wasn't there. Falling to his knees, he dropped his smoky head into his hands and wept. It seemed like he was there for hours, crying for his lost love and his continued existence, one that would be forever restless without Sabrina. Then, a hand came down on his shoulder. Slowly he turned to see who the hand belonged to, and to his surprise, He was surprised to see Sabrina staring down at him, as pretty as always in her white dress. He stood and took her hand in his, staring into her eyes. His mouth sputtered, once again unable to express what he was feeling. Rather than trying any further, David took Sabrina in his arms and kissed her deeply. It was only then that he felt what the others must have been feeling all those years when they took another's hand and played musical graves. Rules are rules, after all, is what he said. Did anyone actually believe that coming from the devil? It even sounded ridiculous to his own ears. Lucifer thought about this even as he stood in the darkened shadows of the graveyard and watched the two ghosts embrace. Since when did he ever follow rules? Yet some may wonder why he had let her go. Perhaps he had grown soft over the years. Rumors of this had been flying around as of late. No, that wasn't it. Though he surely could not have made this move in front of Gazul, or he would have appeared to be soft. There were enough beings trying to claim his throne. He didn't need to add that to the list. Maybe he had done it for the simple fact that it was a rule. No one likes to break the rules more than he does. It had been a favorite pastime of his for eons. He supposed a shred of that might be true, but still, maybe, and please bear with me here, just maybe, he had known such love before, perhaps in some long forgotten time before the world had grown to fear and despise him. He took some lovely creature in his arms and kissed her as David was kissing Sabrina before him. The devil smiled and turned away from the happy reunion, and as he walked back to the mausoleum door, he wondered what had ever happened to the girl he loved so. All right, good night, Haley. I don't know if you're already gone, but I love you, and I hope you sleep well. All right, guys, we're at 2.5 hours, so I guess I should probably call this anyhow. I'm out of stories, anyways. So, thank you everybody for hanging out. It was fun. Had a good time. Glad you all listened. I like that story too, Jack. And I'll probably hop in on Discord or something like that if anyone wants to, shoot the shit afterwards, after this or whatever. All right. Well, you have a good night, Haley. I love you and happy birthday. Yep. Y'all have a good one. Bye.